Bonjour, Steve Earle. Hi.
How are you?
I'm not too bad. So, The Low Highway, that's the title of your new not book, but album. Well, it's about the love of being on tour.
No, it's about what I saw out the window. I mean, I love touring, but the songs are about. I was making a record on the road, and I started out just wanted to make a record with my band, and because I had the best band I've ever had. And the first songs that I wrote were written for Treme, for the television show that I was in and that I do music for. Well, I'm not in it anymore because they shot me in the face, but I was still doing music for it. And I'd write the songs, I'd demo them with the band because I was on the road, and send the tape, the recordings off to David Zisman, and then after a while, through that process, I figured out that I was making a record, and you got to write songs about something, and it discovered that, continuing on the theme about the songs about New Orleans, which were about people in New Orleans, and, people having a hard time after Hurricane Katrina. And one of the things that happened after Hurricane Katrina is the economy sort of collapsed, and it's made it hard for New Orleans to come back, and it's because it's hard for the rest of the country. So the record started being about, and the song "The Low Highway" came along because of looking out the window and seeing an America that I never thought I would live to see. It was, I grew up singing songs about the Depression just because I came up after Bob Dylan and he came up after Woody Guthrie, and we all sang songs about the Depression, and none of us are old enough to remember the Depression. And now we're seeing times that are that hard firsthand, and it never occurred to me till I started writing these songs. So.
You mentioned Treme, and there's there's two songs on the album regarding this TV show. I'd like to know. I know that you were aware of all the musical from New Orleans and all that before you were involved in the show, but I'd like you to tell me about what this music influenced you during your whole career, all this aspect of your musical roots.
Well, I mean, I grew up not that far from there, and I actually started school in Louisiana, in Lake Charles, Louisiana, which is further southwest, more Cajun territory, and it was always a part of the Devil's Right Hand. That comes from from Cajun music. That's where that feel comes from, and I spent time in New Orleans. I would go there. I had a lot of friends that lived there. But now, obviously, in the last few years, getting to go there as much as I did, I'm much more deeply connected to it, and it had a big influence on this record.
Yeah. Since you're a published writer now, I'd like to know if does your approach of songwriting change? I mean, the fact that some words you put on the paper, some's gonna have some music with it, some won't.
Well, yeah, I think I write all kinds of stuff. I think I still write prose like a songwriter. I think I still find myself, I almost got kicked out of the writer's room, which is in New York City, a place to write is space is always an issue, and I'm married, so I couldn't write at home all the time, and between my wife and dogs and kids, it was hard to do. So a lot of people, I joined this place called the Writer's Room, which is a bunch of cubicles, and you're supposed to be quiet there. You're not allowed to talk, but I discovered really quickly, because people kept shushing me, that sometimes when I write, I talk. Especially when I'm writing dialogue, if I'm not careful, I catch myself saying the words out loud. But I've learned to do that without actually making a sound now. But I literally, because of being a songwriter, I think the number of beats and all that stuff, it's sort of an instinctive thing to me. I want rhythm in what I write, and the writing I love is written like that anyway. So whether it's set to music or not.
You have some favorite authors, writers? I mean,
yeah, I've had different ones, different parts. Michael Ondaatje is one of my very favorite. He wrote my favorite book anyway, which is called Coming Through Slaughter, which was Michael's first novel. I love Nick Tasha's, whose new book I'm reading right now, who's incredible. I think he's the only guy that started out writing about rock and roll that ended up being a real writer. And he wrote another book that was one of my very favorite books called In the Hand of Dante about 7 or 8 years ago. Plus some really, really good nonfiction. A great book about Dean Martin. He's proud to say he's my neighbor, and I really, I'm reading his new book, Me and the Devil, right now, and it's pretty great so far.
So I heard that one of the next books is going to be in like an autobiography, like memoir or something?
It's a memoir, and it's not really an autobiography. It's a memoir, which means the bar is really high because there's been some good ones recently. So I'm competing with Bob Dylan and Patti Smith, not Keith Richards. I'm like trying to write something that's art.
So I remember you saying in an interview, it was for John Walker's Blue, I knew that nobody else was going to write that song.
Right.
Every once in a while something falls to you and you know that you're supposed to do it because either nobody else will.
Right.
Does that mean that a songwriter have missions sometimes?
Yeah, I think I do. I mean, I think artists have missions, and I don't think anybody's obligated to do anything, but I think every once in a while you'll run across a piece of work that only you can do, and either because sometimes it's because people are afraid to, sometimes it's because people just aren't capable of doing it. It's hard to write about politics. You know, I write about politics as much as I do because it's a really hard thing to do well, and I happen to be able to do it, so I feel obligated to do it from time to time. It's not all I write, but you know, it's a very hard thing to write about, you know, ideology and keeping it human, you know, keeping it from being strictly rhetoric.
Acting is also something kind of new in your huge rainbow of doing acting. Is acting like have an impact on what you're doing?
Yeah, sure it does, because when you go out and when you memorize words and go out and perform words written by David Simon and Tim Blake Nelson, you know, you get better at writing. You know, those guys can write, so it's that's the main reason that I've continued to do it. I mean, when I first, David Simon basically invented the whole idea of me being an actor. He wrote this part for me in The Wire, and I'd been turning down. I used to turn down a lot of acting roles back when I was a lot better looking and, you know, younger than I am now. But I, for some reason, said yes when he asked me, and I read for it and I got the part, and I've discovered that I enjoy doing it quite a bit.
I was watching for the 26th time 2 months ago It Won Highways, and I mean you were not even 20 at that time, I guess. And I was thinking is like hanging with the likes of Tones and Guy and all these guys who were like people you really admired at that time. At a certain point, was it like a break in the evolution of your and birth of your own personal style? Like it was too heavy, or not that much actually?
I just think it took me as long as it took. I don't know whether I would have been ready to make a record before I did. I could have put some kind of record together, and I think maybe I would have gotten better faster if I'd started making records earlier. I don't know the answer. All I know is that was Christmas of 1970 or 1974, and you know, it took me until 1986 to actually, you know, I made a record actually in a little before that, in '82, but it wasn't released. The album wasn't released, just a few singles, and it took me a long time to get a record deal, and I don't know why, but I was capable of putting together a whole album worth of songs by the time I did, and the bar was pretty high, so I think I was lucky I got a handle on what it takes to write enough songs to make a credible record. And you know, nowadays maybe albums are archaic, it could be, but that's still what I do. It's all I do, and that's probably what I'll do for the rest of my life, is I'll write albums to be albums for you to put on and listen to.
But did you feel comfortable with your style at that time when you were just 20? How were you with your songwriting? You knew that you already had a voice in a way?
I wrote Tom Hanks' Prayer when I was 20, and I wrote Ben McCullough when I was 20. So I was capable of writing really good stuff. I just don't think, I mainly hadn't matured as a performer, and so I couldn't convince anybody that I was, you know, the type of person that deserved a record deal, because I just wasn't. I was a very spotty live performer until I was in my early 30s.
You think finally it's a good thing that your first real album came out when you were more than 30 years old?
Like I said, I don't know. I think maybe if I'd gotten a shot at making a record when I was 20, I think I think I would have gotten better faster, but it didn't happen, so there's no use in worrying about it. I mean, Justin's just now 31. Justin's just now the age that I was when my first record came out, and he's working on his fifth. So, you know, and which makes me a little jealous sometimes.
On Tones Van Zandt, I mean, on the fact that even if he's still celebrated as being one of the best songwriters of his generation, it seems that him only, was the reason that he did not become as famous as he deserved. Like if he was not this comfortable with the idea of succeeding, don't you think?
I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think he shot himself in the foot. I know, I was there. He basically was his own worst enemy. I think he was uncomfortable with success. I think he had a hard time believing that he deserved anything good to happen to him. I think it was, I don't know where that came from. Townes had some issues. He was an alcoholic, and there were some other things going on with him too. And you know, he also was brilliant. And but it wasn't about him being a misunderstood genius. He was a genius, but he wasn't misunderstood. He just had a talent for doing exactly what he needed to do at exactly the right moment to make sure that he didn't do as well as he could have done. It was amazing. He could pick just had a built-in homing device that steered him dead center wrong every time. It was amazing.
At the time you met him, how were you looking at the oldest generation of singers and writers from the, let's say, Outlaws movement, like from Willie to Whelan to Billy Joe and all that guy?
Well, that was just beginning to go on when I met Townes. I met Townes in 1972, so that was just getting ready to happen, and I was sort of part of it and sort of there. And because I didn't stay in Texas, I went on to Nashville. So when I got to Nashville in late '74, the Outlaws was just getting ready to come out, and the Red-Headed Stranger came out later after I got to Nashville. But you know, phases and stages had happened, and the first those two Jerry Jeff Walker records on MCA had come out, and you know, there was a thing going on in Austin. The Outlaws in Nashville, you know, that's Tom Paul Glaser, and there was a lot of people hanging out around Tom Paul's studio all night long. There were a lot of people hanging around Jack Clement's studio all night long, and there were a lot of people hanging around Pete Drake's studio. So there was, which is where the David Allen Co. records were made and some other records, and I got there just as all that was going on. So it was, it wasn't so much something that influenced me as something that I was a part of.
At the same time, I mean, you were also listening to non-country stuff like rock and roll and all that stuff.
I was.
So
not as much. I mean, it took me a while. I know that in 1977, there were moments when I had to pay attention to what was going on in mainstream rock, because all of that was very big. Like Austin was a big deal. So I was listening to Jerry Jeff Walker, and I was listening to Willis Allen Ramsey, and I was listening to Townes, and then these were people I was starting to know. And but every once in a while I would hear some noise from outside of the little world that I lived in that was sort of centered in either Austin or Nashville. And you know, Bruce Springsteen came along, and oh well, that's pretty cool, you know. And I remember very clearly the first time I heard Elvis Costello. It was 1977, and I was living in Mexico, and I was kind of commuting back and forth to Nashville, and I came to Austin to pick up my paycheck and from the publishing company I was working for, and cash it and take the money back to Mexico. And I went by a friend of mine's house, and he says, "You got to hear this." And that was the first time that I really wanted an electric guitar in a long time, was hearing My Aim Is True. The songs were so great, and they were 2 minutes and 30 seconds long, and there was a bunch of them, and they had great melodies. And that same trip, I saw the Sex Pistols in San Antonio. That was just me acting as a guide for some friends of mine. I didn't know who the Sex Pistols were. I'd vaguely heard about them, but somebody said, well, they're playing this place in San Antonio called Randy's Rodeo. And I said, well, that's right behind where I grew up. I can show you where it is. So I rode down there with them, and I saw it. It wasn't very much to see. I mean, Sid got hit with a bottle of beer, and he kind of staggered around and bled for most of the set, and there was no bass, you know. So, and I think they played for 30 minutes or something like that. So,
but as a punk rock music at that time, had an impact on your way you approach music? Maybe not this concert, but
well, no, I saw that and I thought, wow, that wasn't very good. But then Never Mind the Bollocks is a really good record. I got a hold of the record and I thought, oh well, there's something going on here. So I knew about. I started backtracking to punk rock music at that point, and it sort of had an influence on. Out of that came the sort of neo-rockabilly thing, and that's when I finally got an electric guitar and picked it up, and it got me a record deal. I made an EP called Pink and Black in 1982 with a three-piece rockabilly band, and that got Epic Records' attention, and they signed. The Stray Cats were going on by that time, and got me a record deal. It didn't do anything, those records, but it got me a record deal, which eventually led to the MCA deal, and I made Guitar Town. So.
It seems that the fact that you liked and you still like, many different musical textures. It's what we can hear even on your album today, with some heavy guitars and some acoustics. There's some like Cajun flavor, some more like Irish stuff. It's like it's a need for you to don't stay in a certain.
I'm a songwriter, so just to keep from getting bored, I'm glad I can move around in all of those different areas. Writing a gypsy jazz song, something that's based on that stuff was, and the idea for that came from Treme as well. Lucia and I wrote it. Lucia is a classical violinist, and her character is playing on the streets, in New Orleans, and I thought we need to write something, based on that Stefan Grappelli kind of thing. For you to play, and that was the whole idea of Love's Gonna Blow Away. It's actually Eleanor Whitmore, my fiddle player, that plays it on my version. I think Lucia's going to record it as well when she makes her own record after Treme's over this season.
So you on politics, you grew up during the Vietnam War, and you were playing in coffee houses, late 60s, beginning of the 70s, and politics was more than in the air at that time. I'd like to know, do you feel the young generation of today's songwriters involved in political issues as your generation was?
No, and I understand why. They aren't going to get drafted, so they didn't. Politics weren't personal to them, and to us it was. But I wish people would be more politically involved. Some people are.
Yeah, there's some heavy matters like war or ecology or whatever. There's a lot of huge topics today.
There are. There's no doubt about it. But people are. I think a lot of it is people are afraid just because the music business is in such bad shape to begin with. People are just afraid to rock the boat at all because they're afraid that they won't be able to get a record deal or nobody will listen to the record. So I'm like, the train's already left the station on that for me. People either kind of know what I'm about. Occasionally I'll get somebody that'll get angry at one of my shows and walk out and they'll stop at the merch table. And I've got a guy that takes care of my merch for me that travels with me all the time nowadays. And they'll go, I didn't come here for, and he's like always, what part of Steve Earle did you not understand? It's one of those things. I think by now most people know that they're probably going to hear a little bit about what I believe if they come out and see a show. So it's just part of the deal.
You, in interviews you always say everything. In your song you say a lot of stuff. Your life was like zoomed by cameras and all that. You even did like a DVD about like your style and all that. I'd like to know all this other aspect of like songwriting, like being somebody public, showing your guts to everybody. Is it like something? Is it a need? Is it part of the stuff?
It's just the way that I do it, and it makes people uncomfortable. It makes my wife uncomfortable. It makes other people uncomfortable. I myself just don't know. I know to do what I do. My job is the only way I can write anything that's really great is to write about something that I care about and something I know about. But the only way I'm going to have an audience is if I write about it in such a way that other people relate to it. In other words, the job is basically to write something about me in such a way that people hear it and they think it's about them. And because we all have a lot in common. It's about what we have in common. It's about what I have in common with my audience, not how I'm different than my audience. And I don't, I guess there is a kind of performing and a kind of writing that's about the differences between the performer and the audience, but I don't understand that. I understand, And the best way I know to gain that kind of intimacy with an audience is to be completely and totally open, because it shows that I trust the audience. I do trust my audience, at least as an audience. You know, there's probably, after the show's over, you know, we have to find other rules to work with. But if I'm open like that, I think people respond to it by being more open and more receptive to a lot of things. And maybe I've had people come up to me and tell me that they changed their mind about the death penalty because of something they heard in one of my songs. That's a huge thing. That's an incredibly powerful thing. To change one person's heart or mind about something as divisive as the death penalty in the United States is a very, very, very big deal. And it makes me feel like maybe I haven't been wasting my time.
You think it's the same thing when somebody tell you just what you mentioned, that they change their idea, mind about, like, then when it's something very, very personal about something happens to you, more like intimistic than like a major politics topics? You think that at the end everything goes in the same direction, but what a song is about, a great song?
I think because I do the things that are so personal as well, I think it's the same audience. And I think when the political idea comes along, they're more likely to be receptive to it, you know, or at least think about it, because there's a trust. There's some sort of bridge that's been built between us.
Is your idea of what a great song is, a good song, not say a good song is, changed during your career?
No, I think good songs are songs that that make people feel. For the most part, songs make people feel good, even if they make them feel bad. The end result is that they feel better for the experience of hearing them. You can make art that just bums people out, and I'm not into that. I'm not on, you know, I'm okay with making people cry, but I want them to come away from it feeling like they want to hear it again, and like it was worth it, like it was worth, you know, whether it's worth the ride.
Who are the young songwriters that touched you today? That impressed you or touched you?
Justin's pretty damn good. You know, there's a guy called Willie Mason who's really incredible, and he hasn't made a record in a while now. I wish he would hurry up and make a record. He lives out on Cape Cod in the middle of nowhere, or he lives on Martha's Vineyard actually, and which is even out beyond Cape Cod. And he's like the best I've seen in a long time. I think Joe Pug's really good. God, who else? I think God, I can't remember the kid's name right now, but he's the guitar player and keyboard player in the Low Anthem, whose name escapes me right now. I think writes really great songs. You know, there's writers out there. You know, there's a few that have come along that they're people that still do it. There's still people that are interested in writing real songs.
You were born in Virginia, you grew up in Texas, you lived in California, I think now you're based in New York. Is that like a place, a town, a state maybe, which you feel more home than home?
I feel more at home in New York than I have any place else I've ever been, you know. There's only a few places I could live at this point in my life. I could live in Paris, but if the only thing that would stop me from living in Paris would be I've lived in places where I don't understand the language that's going on around me, and it's great for a while, and then I start feeling like I'm deprived, like it's like not having any oxygen because I'm a writer and I need. I mean, I steal the things that I hear on the subway and that I hear people say going down the streets. That stuff ends up in my work. So, you know, I had the same problem. I wrote a lot of my last book in Barcelona, and it's, you know, Spanish I can sort of understand what's going on, but they don't speak Spanish in Barcelona. They speak Catalan, and it's like, you know, I felt it was great for a while because nothing distracted me. But if I was having to live there, I realized after a while that I you know, I'll get back to. I just spent 2 weeks in Israel, and people don't speak English much there. They speak Hebrew most of the time and Arabic, and so I just didn't. You know, I got to England, and after that, and it sounded like everybody was shouting. but it's one of those things. So there's a good side and there's a bad side to it. But New York feels like home because it's as close as, you know, it feels more like Europe. It feels more like other places in the world. And it feels like the whole world sometimes because everything comes to it. But the background noise is mostly in English, so I absorb stuff. I don't understand the guys that get on the subway wearing earbuds. You know, they're missing the songs. I just don't, I would never ever do that. Sorry.
Are you listening to a lot of stuff today? I mean, do you go to a lot of gigs? Do you?
I don't.
Do you
I go to more theater and baseball than I do anything else. I see a lot of plays. I go see bands from time to time, but like I said, the last band that, you know, completely knocked me out, new band was the Low Anthem. But I saw I'm a huge, my favorite band right now is probably the Punch Brothers, and I saw them recently. They were playing in, it was the night before New Year's Eve in New York City, and it's one of the best gigs I've ever seen in my life. And they're, you know, we're talking about making a record at some point in the future, and I hope that happens.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.